Every year, just when you think you have a full and complete understanding of everything that's happening in fundraising and with donor behavior, Dunham and Company comes out with their annual survey of donors, and we learn something new each and every year. We're going to do so again today on this First Day podcast from the Fundraising School. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, joined once again by Rick Dunham. Rick is the founder and chairman of Dunham and Company, a national and international fundraising consulting firm. And Rick, glad to have you back with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thanks, Bill.
So this latest survey, again, a lot of myth busting, a lot of, did not know that, yet again, from your firm's report. And first of all, as we were entering this new year, there was some interesting data, not just about people and whether they were going to donate more or less, but why. Can you help our audience understand that, please?
Sure. I think the first thing that really popped out to me was the fact that people were feeling less financially stressed, but were more pessimistic about the economy. And I think that one of the things that kind of came through as a theme throughout the survey was the psychological impact, the view of the economy, your personal finance, even if it's okay, even if it's improved, just a psychological factor that's a negative will actually impact giving and cause, in this particular report, about 25% of donors said they were going to pull back.
And so their reality, that's their personal finances. They're looking at the spreadsheets. They're looking at their own balance sheets. Those are facts. Those are figures. Perception is what they think and can be so much harder to persuade somebody towards a different perception. What advice do you have for fundraisers as more and more of donors and prospective donors are being influenced by this perception more than their own financial reality?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty hard hurdle to overcome, because as they look out over the economy and have, perceptions and beliefs about where the economy might be headed, I think that's a huge challenge to overcome. But having said that, I think we always advise our clients, make sure that you're keeping the why in front of your donors. In other words, what is it that the donor gift is making possible? How is it being used to transform and impact lives? And making sure that you're story led, that you're demonstrating that in the reality of the story of those whose lives are impacting. So it's a discipline, I think, of cadence of communication that's really critical in this kind of a moment.
Rick, how important is it more than ever before? Empathy has always been important with fundraising, but to associate with that perception, to say, hey, you might be concerned about the economy. Aren't we all, perhaps? I can associate with that. How important is including empathy in these messages since donors are having this perception?
You've landed on probably the most important point. You can't come across the donors as though you are on another planet and not really engaged in reality. And I think being able to speak directly to the reality that donors are facing is really super critical. And it demonstrates that you are living out the same kind of reality they are and that you understand them. And as a result, they can expect that you understand the struggle they might have in giving, but here's the reality of what your gift can make possible today.
Yeah, and if the economic times are tough, the gift is even more impactful during that season.
Yep.
Now, you talk about being from another planet. When I teach for the fundraising school, sometimes I get that reaction from our participants when we talk about direct mail, like Bill Stan, the 1950s called, they want their direct mail strategy back, right? But again, year after year, your surveys continue to show the strength of direct mail fundraising, but there's some new wrinkles in this year's survey. Can you help us understand that, please?
So what's interesting is well over 80% of donors say they respond to direct mail. But as you go and look at the various generations, the generations that respond at the highest rate, it's Gen Z, and 93% of Gen Z say they responded to direct mail. And even more importantly, 80% of Gen Z say they would like to have a monthly direct mail from the organizations they support. And I kind of, as we've coached on this, I'm old enough to remember the day of the mailbox being the primary place where information was gathered. And there was no such thing as an inbox. The inbox today is the old mailbox, stuff full, very hard to get through, to get attention. Direct mail, you go to your mailbox, you might have two, three, four pieces of mail in a day. And if an organization that you care about shows up, you're going to engage with that.
Completely agree, Rick, and that's affirmed by, again, when we teach for the fundraising school, and especially the Gen Z and millennial generations who are the digital natives. They say my eyeballs are on screens all the time,
Exactly.
and my inbox is overwhelming, and I can't get to all the texts and the DMs. And now I've got this piece of paper in my hand that I can devote some time to. And Rick's explanation there, the survey wonderfully calls it the mailbox advantage. So when you get the survey, make sure you learn more about that mailbox advantage being enjoyed by old-fashioned snail mail over direct mail. Now, that said, how are people donating when
Yes.
they're opening up the
I
direct
was
mail?
hoping you were going to ask that question because that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
I've had so many organizations say, we look at response to direct mail and it just doesn't work anymore. And you got to call a timeout and say, whoa, that's because you're only tracking directly traceable income back through the mail. In reality, nearly 50% of donors say that they prefer to go online to give a gift once they get a direct mail package. And it's around 20% that say they prefer to give back through the mail. So if you just run the numbers, double the amount of giving is going to come online than what you're getting back through the mail. And I actually have an organization that I'm working with that we've been able to develop a model where we trace indirect income. So what we do is we look at everybody who received the direct mail package, and then we look at all online giving for the next 30 days. It can't be a monthly gift and it can't be in response to an email. It has to come completely randomly, but they still got the direct mail. We call that indirect income, and we're consistently 2.5 times more revenue online from that cohort than back through the mail.
And again, the data from the study, when people are receiving a letter, when they respond with a gift, half the time they're doing so online. There's a website there in the letter. There's a QR code that they can hold up the phone or the technology device. Only 20% are mailing in that response card. And Rick, this is a data point that just hit me really hard, that if we're only tracking those response cards, we're only counting about 30% of the money that is coming in after a first introduction through direct mail. 70% of direct mail's impact is not being counted.
Exactly right. And that's why it's really dangerous to judge the effectiveness of your direct mail program just by what you're getting back through the mail.
Just so important. Let's make sure we adjust it. Of course, we spend so much time on those response cards. Let's make sure we're spending time on the digital methods that people are using and on our websites. And in fact, Rick, one of the survey's findings, a big percentage of people just stop because it's too hard to donate online.
Yeah, 1 out of 5 donors said they stop. And it's really interesting. The older generations are more concerned about security. Younger generations want simplicity. So if you think about user experience on your website, the two things you want to focus on is the transaction super simple. Amazon's ruined it for everybody. That's kind of the experience that the consumer's used to. So is it super simple? And number two, do you have the security icon? Something to demonstrate that this is a secure transaction.
Yep, that seamless effort online is what folks are looking for. And speaking of online, again, this is one of those. I usually only see these in the surveys from Dunham Company, like, aha, who knew? The number one reason people give online is
The number one reason, the charity's website is a huge driver to people wanting to give online. So one of the things that I think organizations often overlook is, do they make a case for support in their website? Is it just kind of informational, or have you really thought about the journey somebody goes on when they get to your website? Because donors say that is a primary factor in the rationale as to why they end up giving online.
And again, your survey emphasizes the importance of having a conversation, having there be engagement. Don't just create awareness and don't just ask all the time, but in social media and online, we're really trying to involve the donor.
Yes, absolutely.
And Rick, you also talked about, this was so interesting, the number and percentage of people who, when they give online, are asked in person first. That is
Yeah.
really profound.
Yeah, so one of the interesting when we've been tracking this for a number of years now, is that the person-to-person request for donation is really a primary driver again to online giving. And primarily what we have found is it's typically there's two things that are happening there. One is some are reflecting the experience in a religious service of being asked directly. That's part of what's being reflected there. And the other part that's being reflected is in social media when they're part of a group and they're being asked to join some sort of a fundraiser.
And so don't discount the importance of in-person requests, not just with your major donors, not just with your mid-level donors, but even folks who could be those base level donors and are going to respond online.
Yep.
Rick, one of the things, again, this is heart-wrenching for all of us, is then when people don't donate, when they are non-donors, and it's not because they're not asked, but they're confronted with the opportunity, there is awareness, and they still decide not to donate anyway. Of course, there are a myriad of reasons in human behavior, but one of them is a lack of trust in our sector. Can you explain that for us, please? And then
Yeah,
also what we can do about it.
yeah, this for the first time we actually included a cohort of non-donors because we wanted to do some compare and contrast between donor profile behaviors and non-donors. And you're right. One of the things that popped out really strongly was the lack of trust in charities. That there's a much higher lack of trust in charities than among donors. And, that we didn't, kind of kicking myself on this, I wish we would have had some follow-up questions on that to try to dig into a little bit. So I think next year we'll probably go a bit deeper on that. But my hunch is they've probably had some sort of a negative experience with a personal experience with a charitable organization, and or there's just a complete misunderstanding of what NGOs actually do, and they've not been really exposed to it. So I think part of the goal of any charitable organization is to make sure that you're putting forward the kind of communication that does build that trust. And one of the ways to do that is using donor testimony, people that are currently supporting you right now, of having them, for instance, on your website, having a quote from them as to why they support your charity and why they think it's so important and trustworthy.
Oh, and the research backs that up, peer-to-peer influence, whether it's our boards, whether it's our staff colleagues, whether it's our donors. So demonstrating those donor voices, showing our impact, being transparent about our finances, listing our boards, all these different ways. However, we're communicating with our donors, including, as Rick just said, putting some donor testimonials up there can help as well. There's some other sections, Rick, I know that you'd like to highlight. There's a section on religion. There's a section on the whole new tax policy. What are some of the things readers are going to see there?
Yeah, again, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about new tax policy. I think the biggest takeaway is generally donors are unaware, especially around the universal charitable tax deduction. So, and 67% of your donors are probably taking the standard deduction. So you've got an education problem on your hands. You've got to make sure that you're using your receipts, drops into newsletters, that type of thing, drops in your receipting to kind of a did you know. We're doing this with a number of our clients, just having a quick did you know and explaining kind of the tax policy with the UCD. On the religious involvement, what we're seeing is the continuing trend that we've been seeing now for a number of years, where Gen Z is the most engaged in their faith. And I actually this wasn't part of the study, but I actually did a bit of a calculation because I wanted to understand Gen Z giving at this stage versus millennial giving at this stage. So a number of years ago, we did a millennial study. This goes back to 2017. And on average, millennials were giving $580. And right now, see the number, yeah, it's 867 for Gen Z currently. They are actually Gen Z is younger now than millennials were back in 2017. In my mind, there's this correlation, and we've known it forever, of religious engagement and giving. And I think the fact that 40% of Gen Z say they attend religious services almost every week, and the fact that they're giving at a higher rate, I think there's a clear correlation there. So all that to say, I think it bodes well for the future of the charitable sector if indeed we can engage that generation in our cause.
And let's then synthesize here. Gen Z, some of them are still middle school and high schools. We record this
Right.
interview, but some of them are just graduating from college. Okay, now they're employed. They're going to be filling out their tax forms. They are eligible for that universal charitable deduction of $1,000 or $2,000 if they're married. Put that all together, and there's some new base level donors just waiting to be asked, Rick, by our nonprofit fundraisers.
And I think you've nailed it. I think we need to understand the transfer of wealth that's going to be happening and working with our older donors, but we can't ignore what's happening in this younger generation and getting them engaged now.
Rick Dunham is the founder and chairman of Dunham Company. They do this donor survey every year. We have a link in the show notes for you on how to obtain that free report as Rick is leading this wonderful national and international fundraising consulting firm. You can see also why Rick is so closely aligned and associated with the Giving Institute and the Giving USA Foundation, whichever you support our work on Giving USA here at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Rick, always a delight. I can't wait for our next opportunity for our pathways to intersect again. And in the meantime, be well.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
And these type of data are in all of our courses at the Fundraising School. We're now in more than 24 cities with our in-person courses, and of course online anywhere across the world. We can do customized training just for your nonprofit or your association or your geography, whatever works best for you. We have quarterly webinars and of course these weekly free podcasts. Achieving Excellence in Fundraising. The flagship book is now out in its 5th edition, and there's now a new series of books coming out in between the flagship edition and the first one coming out in 2026 on board engagement with fundraising. All this information is online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful for our producers today, Don Lorenz and Jennifer Boffman. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.